Hi guys. This video is tailored to those who are trying to decide which introductory coding course they want to take, or those who want to see if CS50 is the right coding course for them. I will be breaking down the key concepts that we'll be learning week by week so that you can get a quick sense of what are the main concepts you're going to learn and ultimately what you're going to be able to do with that knowledge by the end of the course. And as I'm doing this, I'm going to assume that you don't have any prior background or experience in coding, so I'll try to add in some simple analogies to make the concepts more relatable. So, week 0. Here, you're going to get an introduction to what algorithms are. Algorithms are essentially step-by-step instructions for how to solve a problem or complete a task. You can think of this like following a recipe in a cookbook or even tying your shoelaces. You'll also learn that computers are fundamentally dumb and we have to be very careful to explain specifically exactly how we want to complete a task, as there is no real room for interpretation by the machine. Additionally, you'll learn about abstractions, which is a key concept in programming, and how computers are only able to understand essentially a series of ones and zeros, and how using compilers we can write source code, which is the code that we typically see and associate with programming, and how that is translated to ones and zeros for the machines to understand. And this is through a process called compiling. In this week, you'll be introduced to Scratch, which is a fun, interactive way of building basic programs and learning about the fundamental concepts in coding without needing to write any code. Here is a taster of what I built in Scratch. In week 1, you'll be introduced to your first programming language, C. This is an older programming language, but one which influenced many modern programming languages we use today, such as C++ and Java. We will spend a few weeks on this programming language, and it will be challenging at times, but it's really going to help us to learn some of the more fundamental concepts in how programming works. Here you'll be introduced to some concepts such as loops, variables, conditionals, and data types. With loops, this is when you would like the computer to do something more than one time. So for example, you want them to do it 5 times, or you want it to keep executing something until a certain condition is met. For setting variables, if you think back to high school maths class, this is where you would say, let x equal a certain value, and then you use x as the placeholder, and you can add additional calculations to that as you go on. This is a fundamental concept in programming. And you'll also be introduced to the compiler, which is how source code, which is the human readable language code, is converted into machine code. Next, we'll dive deeper into algorithms, and we'll learn that there are many different ways to solve the same problem, some being more effective than others. On that note, we'll also be introduced to ways of measuring the effectiveness of algorithms. The problem set for week 3, you have 2 options. One is called Tiedman, one is called Runoff. Tiedman, I hear, is a bit notorious for being quite a challenging one. I tried the easier version, Runoff, which I still find challenging. My only advice for anyone struggling with this would be the video walkthroughs are your friend. Okay, week 4. This is where we're going to learn about how memory works in computing. You can imagine memory is like having all of these little empty spaces within the computer, and that is where things will ultimately be stored. And by using pointers, which is a concept we will learn this week, we can point to specific addresses in the memory to read or write to them. The problem set in this week is actually quite a fun one, where we'll be taking images and then manipulating them in some way, such as adding filters, blur, and other types of effects. What I found cool about this week's problem set is that you're building a program that you could imagine using day to day. In week 5, we're going to be learning about different types of data structures, such as arrays, linked lists, and hash tables. What we'll learn here is that there's often a trade-off between the amount of memory that an algorithm or a program takes up and the performance, speed, or flexibility of that algorithm. Finally, week 6, Python. This represents a big milestone because Python is one of the most popular modern programming languages and makes a lot of the previous work that you've done in C much easier. In this week, we'll learn about the basic syntax of Python, as well as some of the core concepts such as loops, arrays, and conditionals, and how they look in the Python language. As you'll see as you start to tackle the exercises this week and the final problem set, some tasks which took many lines of code in C can be done with like 1 or 2 lines in Python. This may feel a bit depressing, but just know that learning in C was the best way of learning some of the other fundamental concepts such as compiling, memory allocation, and variable types. For the practice exercises this week, you will actually go through some of the previous problem sets you did in C and code those in Python, and that was quite interesting as a comparison of how the programming languages differ and how Python just simplifies and does so much of the heavy lifting for you. In this week, you'll be introduced to a new programming language, SQL, which is how you will interact with databases. One way of imagining this is if you think of having a library. This library would represent the database, and each of the books within this library will represent a table within that database. Of course, within each of these books will be data, which in this case is the words and pictures within that book. And in order to interact with this library, you have the librarian who represents SQL. You might go to the librarian and say, can you show me the books which were written by that author? So using SQL, you will filter for a specific subset of the data or the tables within your library. Alternatively, you might ask, can you show me the books within the mystery category which have been published after 2020, for example? So you can add multiple conditions to filter the data using SQL. The problem set for this week I actually personally found really fun. It helps that SQL is actually a pretty easy programming language with just a few basic functions. So compared to the other programming languages you'll learn, this is the simplest one. And you get to play detective and dig through different databases to find clues to find out who committed a certain crime. In week 8, you'll learn about how the internet works, some markup languages, and a new programming language, JavaScript, to help you build websites. You'll learn how the internet is essentially a big interconnected network, which is made up of smaller networks which have all agreed on a common way of communicating with each other, similar to a language, which in this case is HTTP. And after learning about some of the theory about how the internet works, the practical part will be learning about how to create websites using HTML and CSS, which is a styling language for basically changing how a website looks and feels, and also a front-end programming language called JavaScript, which is how you will make websites dynamic and interactive. Finally, in the problem set for this week, you will take all these learnings to build your personal website. For me, I really enjoyed that I could have the code on one side of the screen and a browser open on the other side of the screen, write some code, refresh the screen, and then see it being updated live on the web page was really cool. In week 9, you will take the learnings from your previous week and also a lot of the other concepts you learned in the course to build your first web application. What makes a web application different from a website is that a website tends to be static. So no matter who is visiting the website, they tend to see the same information. Whereas with a web application, it might depend on which user has logged in or which type of interactions the user's had. So it's a lot more personalized and interactive. One example might be Facebook, where when you are logging in, you only expect to see your personal feed and not some kind of generic Facebook website, which everybody can see. Of course, web applications are more complex than websites as you take certain inputs and then produce certain outputs accordingly, but you're introduced to a new framework called Flask, which helps to make this process easier of routing users to specific websites as well as integrating with the database to provide customized outputs to the user. In the problem set for this week, you will build a finance application where a user is able to search for stocks, buy and sell stocks, as well as log in and authenticate. Personally, I found this problem set challenging but very motivating as you're able to tie in so many different concepts that you learned in the course, and you're able to see direct feedback in the application as it starts to hopefully work as you build different types of the code. In week 10, the final week of CS50, you're introduced to some basic cybersecurity principles, such as the use of password managers, two-factor authentication, and end-to-end encryption. But the focus of this week is on your final project, where you'll get to take your learnings from this course and apply them into creating anything you want. For me, as I know that I want to learn about the AI space, I use this as an opportunity to create an AI coding assistant chatbot. What I found interesting about the final project was that in the academic guidelines, they say for this specific project only, you are allowed to use AI coding assistants outside of the CS50 Duck AI, which they had built themselves to act as a guide. And for me, this was actually a very good learning opportunity to understand how you can work with AI as a coding tool, but also it's important to keep in mind that this is a great opportunity to consolidate your learning, and so you should be doing as much of the coding yourself and having the AI help you with specific things, and that of course you're understanding what the AI is producing and possibly modifying that so you're not just getting the AI to do it for you, because then you miss out on that learning opportunity. Now lastly, let's talk about how you can get the CS50 certificate for free. The key thing to keep in mind here is that you do not have to pay edX for their verified certificate. Instead, you can get the certificate directly from Harvard's platform. So to show you how to do this, this is what the page might look like once you enroll onto CS50 through edX. When you click into the course, you can select any one of the week's lectures and click into one of the problem sets. As soon as you do this, you'll be taken to a different platform, which is actually hosted by Harvard. This one is detached from edX, and you are able to go through each of the weeks here, view all of the content, including the lectures and shorts, go into the problem sets, follow the instructions and submit the problem sets through this method. And then once you've done all of the week's problem sets, including the final project, you're able to click on CS50 certificate and get the instructions to how you can request the CS50 free certificate, which is essentially the same as what you would get with edX. So that's it for my summary of CS50. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. In my next one, which I'll link here, I will talk about which strategies I used to manage to complete the course in less than 2 months with a full-time job. So hope to see you in the next one.